Hi, welcome to stage 2 of the 5-day pastel challenge. What we're going to be focusing on today is looking at building up depth and texture in the piece. So I'm going to introduce you to my rule of 3, which is all about creating depth in the clouds and building mark making up. So we're using the pastel and handling it slightly differently, and then doing some interesting blending using a variety of pressure. So I'll see you there. Hi, welcome to day 2 of the 5-day pastel challenge. So the first thing I'd like to do is reassure you that it is entirely normal for your work to look slightly messy, slightly out of focus and stuff, and it's slightly unsure of what's going on. So don't worry, that is quite normal, and that's what it's like when I'm working. Everything starts off looking this way. So what we're going to focus on today, though, is gradually bringing in more texture and more detail and building a few more layers. We're not going to rush to do fine detail. We're going to gradually add more color and add 2 or 3 shades to each area and build up depth and get a real 3D effect and looking less flat. And eventually over the next few challenge days, things will come into focus. They remain unfocused for now, but let's get that depth and that texture going first. So stage 1 is to decide which area to work on first. Now, if you look back at the original photograph here and think, right, I think compared to what we have here, I could do with building a bit more depth of tone through some of this dark cloud here, and also building out some edges onto this pale cloud here. I'm okay with how this blue is right now, so we'll come back to that. Something else to bear in mind is if you think, well, actually, I quite like some effects. You can, at this point, even find some things you think, oh, that's quite a nice effect here. This is quite a nice sweep through here. So the things you like about it, don't feel like you have to overwork them. Feel free to leave things if you think, oh, that works. Just keep it that way. So what I'm going to do is pick 3 shades for each area I'm going to work in. So in this dark cloud here, obviously I want to use this dark purple that I've been using before here. I probably want to use the mid purple as well, and it's got a slightly bruised kind of colouring here, so I might even add on a little bit of this mustard shade here. So we've got a sort of dark, medium and a lighter within a dark range, as it were, or a strong colour range for this area. And let's give it a trial run and see how that goes. Selecting 3 colours is what I call the rule of 3. So I like to have at least 3 shades for each area. And so when you blend, you get a nice variety of tints and shades building up. So let's make a start at that so you can see what I'm talking about and actually see it in action. Now, the first thing to remember, or the second thing, are we on the first thing or the second thing? I can't remember. But anyway, something to remember is that you need to not press too hard. So don't forget about pressure. And it's a very strong colour, isn't it? So let's go in fairly gently. Again, still the flat of the pastel. But what I'm doing here is making some very different mark making to before. I'm building up what I call blocky mark making, blocks of colour. And I'm going to put 2 or 3 of those together. So we have these blocks of colour in the dark purple. Again, not too much pressure. You can see the colour through underneath them. It's quite transparent. It's not as heavy-handed as as these bits here, for example. And then we've got, let's add a bit of this mid-tone first through here, this, just to overlap that a bit and build that up. Again, blocky mark making. I'm going to add a little hint of this mustard shade, not too much, just a little dash, because it's quite a vibrant colour and it's going to take over a little bit. And then I'm going to do a bit of a soft blend, but actually I think I'd like to add a further dark tone to this. I'm going to pick up this other purple and go in with that. Now, the reason for doing these blocks of colour is because it gives you a mottled effect when you blend it. So you get little tints and shades. So it goes beyond being just a flat area of dark cloud into being more cloud-like and more realistic, because within the real thing there are a large variety of tints and shades amongst that. So next we do a gentle blend with whatever finger you like, but I'm using my little finger. Now, not blending too heavily. You should find this stage blends more easily. Don't press too hard, because if you do, you'll lose that slightly patchy mottled effect, which gives it more of a cloud effect. And if you blend too hard, it will also all just become one colour rather than slightly subtle tints and shades. Now, when it comes to the edge, again, use my little finger here. I'm going to slightly push, just slightly, push the cloud up into the surrounding area, and that'll just diffuse it and mix it with the pale colour around it, because some of these edges here are quite diffused, aren't they? So let's just look at that. There's also areas here where there's some darker cloud that spreads into other patches of the cloud here. So I'm going to take my mucky finger and just start to add that. Can you see those fingerprints coming up? If you feel you want any more dark in an area like this, you can then get your finger and just rub it on the pastel and then press some fingerprint marks into that area. And again, you're just putting a small amount, and that's enough just to build a bit more depth, and again gives it that patchy quality, which gives it that cloud-like effect when it's blended. So you continue to do that for any other areas of dark clouds. So what I've done is added some darker pastel through here, the same 3 tints, and then I've used my finger to dab a bit of that onto other areas, and I've done a softening around the edges of the cloud just to let it diffuse in. Now, while I was doing that, this happened. So it gives me a good chance to talk about how I correct things. So this paper, despite being a very soft tooth, has got a really sturdy surface. So I use really old bristle brushes. So something like this is a really old bristle brush, and it's handy for this sort of thing, because what I'm going to do is just take the brush and just dust that over there. So rather than try and work over it and get the colour on top, just dust it off and then just blow the excess dust away. So we've talked about these soft areas of dark cloud here. I know there's a big cloud bank down here, but let's leave this for another session, because this involves, apart from building depth, it also involves adding nice sharp edges and really playing with shaper tools and things that are going to come next. So we're going to come back to this bit here. Let's talk about adding the pale colours. So we've done the rule of 3 for the dark clouds. Now we do the same rule of 3 for the light clouds. Let's move these dark ones out of the way. So we have 3 shades here for our paler cloud areas, which I may add a little bit of subtle tone to as I'm going, but you want at least 3 for each area, like I said. The same mark making as before, so blocky mark making, building up some marks on the surface. Now, I didn't start with demonstrating this because it's harder to see, isn't it, what I'm doing here, but what I'm doing is adding some layers of colour on top of here, and then using our colour to transition into this darker bit of cloud here as well. So I'm overlapping the dark there. You can see how the light goes on top of dark quite happily there, and you can see how the colour is quite transparent, and then again just softening that in. Gentle blend. Pressure is really important with your blending, because if you want that paler colour to dominate the darker cloud, for example, you need to press quite gently so that that becomes the last colour you put on, becomes the dominant shade rather than the one underneath. So you can control that by how hard you press. Now there's also some stronger shades of gold through here. That's a tiny amount there, tiny little dabs, and I'm going to push it around quite firmly. So this is different, isn't it, to the other bit where I blended quite gently. So I wanted the colour to dominate. I don't want this deep ochre to dominate. I'm going to just push it so it really mixes with my colour underneath. And I think it needs a bit more probably of my lemon, and a bit more probably of the very pale as well. As you can see, blocky mark making with that lemon on here, and then some of that white through here. Now, because these colours need to dominate and be quite bright, I'm actually pressing harder. So carry on building your pale colours through here. Again, don't worry too much about detail. Don't worry too much about focusing on things yet. Build it through. It goes up round here and up over here. Now, as you move further away from the source of the sunset, don't forget these colours will change a bit. They're definitely more muted over here than they are over here. So don't apply the same colour here as you would over here. Be aware that as you add this sort of shade here, which is slightly yellow tinted peach, that's I believe the technical name for it, not, that if you're adding it near blue, it may give it a slight green. So remember we talked about bridging colours, so we have this slightly pink one. So use a bit of that with it, so that when you do any blending, it's not going to create an unpleasant tint that you do not want on there. As you can see, I've had a lot of the blocky mark making over the surface with those paler colours. I've also changed direction as I move, so there's a flow to the clouds that comes across this direction here and then swirls a bit this way. So I'm trying to get a sense of movement. So I've changed my blocky mark making and angled it appropriately, thinking about the direction of the clouds. I'm going to leave this area here a little bit. I'm going to take it in a little bit, but I'm not wanting to tackle this bit with you yet. So I just want to cut it down in size a little bit. But if you get odd areas where the pastel's standing out too much and you can see sort of a blob effect and you want to get rid of it, and you can obviously, like this bit here, the very top of the video here and the top of the picture, this sort of mark, you can obviously press a bit harder and diffuse that. You can see how that really disappears, can't you? The more harder you press, the more it vanishes. So pressure is very crucial. So I'm trying to maintain my mark making and not lose that lovely textural marks we're getting. So it's a gentle blend, not much pressure, and a variety of movement through. Okay, so just to recap, what we've done today then is built up some depth of tone and three-dimensional effect on the dark clouds using the rule of 3. So at least 3 shades for the areas, and they've done the same thing, at least 3 shades. I've used probably about 5 or 6 to be honest, but at least 3 shades with the paler cloud areas, and we've used blocky mark making with them. We've changed direction on it as well, and we've blended gently or firmly depending on what effect you want to get with the pastels. And we're gradually building depth and movement through the piece. Good luck with it, guys. Have fun.